Okay, so for the first session for today will be presented by Akshaya Kamalnathn from Australian National University College of Law. She is experienced researcher and teach and research in the university, of course, corporate law, corporate insolvency law, crowdfunding, and so on. So now, today, she's going to present a paper. It's titled Finfluencer and Other Tech Disruption, Implication for Corporate Law. And we have a very professional commentators, Vivien Chen. Vivien Chen is a senior lecturer at Monash University. College of Law, and she do research in both Australia and Malaysia. So let's welcome Akshaya.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Let me begin by thanking Dan and the organizers for inviting me. It's been great so far. My topic today is I've titled my paper Finfluencers and Other Tech Disruptions, and I will focus my talk today on two Asian jurisdictions. I'll focus a lot more on South Korea and a little on India. Let me begin with a brief introduction on what's happening in the US, because I think that's where the spotlight has been, but I'll be brief with that. So when I talk of finfluencers, I think all of us have heard of influencers on social media trying to sell products. Just think of that in the context of finance. People on social media telling you how to make decisions about your personal finance, what company shares to buy, and when to hold, when to sell. And there are people actually listening to these finfluencers and talking, adding to the discussion, and there's whole conversations on social media. We heard yesterday about Snowball in China trying to reflect what happened in the Reddit thread Wall Street Bets. So that's actually where my story starts. Wall Street Bets in the US, which was a Reddit thread where there were people talking about this company called GameStop. And this was during the pandemic, so people had time on their hands. There was also some dispensable income with the pandemic payouts to people. And then there was, to create the perfect storm, you had these apps that allowed for investing. What became famous at the time was Robinhood, but there's been many more apps you can use. And it's sort of gamified in investing, because if you make an investment, however small, there's a confetti animation coming up. So that sort of gets you to invest more. So there was all of that, but there was also the Wall Street Bets discussion, which is reflected in other social media, Twitter, now X, and where people are talking about buying shares in certain companies, etc. With GameStop, the motivation was that there are short sellers that are shorting the stock, but we really like this company. We have nostalgic feelings about this company, so we want to buy shares, we want to hold on to those shares. And it was all sort of centered around one person, Keith Gill, who went by the name Roaring Kitty, I think, on social media. It all centered around him saying this and others following. But then whole communities of discussion started around that. So they developed traditions of celebrating with chicken tenders whenever the price went up of their shares. And so this sort of thing, I'm kind of pointing at these aspects of retail investing to show that there was more to it than expectation of financial gain. There was an expectation that we can find community here. They were responding to a lot of memes on social media. So this came to be known as meme stock, and people started to comment, the more institutional players started to comment on how the stock price has gone up. It's not reflecting the fundamentals. There isn't much thinking around the actual fundamentals, etc. Now, we might have thought this is a pandemic-related development. It'll die away, but it didn't die away. It continued on post-pandemic. The retail investors that invested into companies during the pandemic stayed on. I'll fast forward to the very recent last few days, the proxy contest in Disney, where there was actually a sizable number of retail investors. I think about 30% of the company was retail investors. So we saw a very different sort of engagement strategy in that proxy contest, where management used cartoon characters of Disney to tell retail investors how to vote. And then there was pushback saying, we actually know all of this. We know how to vote. And then you had the CEO speak on more substantive issues. And then you also had the other side, the activist investor, reach out to retail investors through, I think Restore the Magic was the name of that web page, and there were videos there. So I think what it shows is we've come to a point where at least companies with a sizable amount of retail investors have to take them seriously, have to engage with them. But at the same time, I mentioned how it's called meme stocks in the US, and there's a lot of such connotation because there is still, so for example, the social media company associated with Trump, its stock prices went up, and that's a lot of the, there's a lot of politics there that people who are fans of Trump bought those shares, etc. So I'll tease out this element of politics and populism coming through later in my talk, but I've just mentioned that there. So there's all of this in the US, and then you switch the focus and look at South Korea, and you see almost a more mature version of retail investor behavior in that market. It's less of the meme stock frenzy that we saw in the US, more of discussion based on there has to be a reason why people think this company's share prices will go up and they invest. So I'll give you an example, and I think it came to international attention around the time after GameStop. I think there was a company, I think it was EM Batteries. Is that, I have the company names. Yeah, EcoPro BM. That was the company which was making batteries for electric vehicles. And there was a lot of retail investors already in South Korea by this time. But around the time where the international focus was looking at that, we had someone who came to be known as Mr. Battery, but that was a Finfluencer. We had him doing videos on YouTube encouraging people to buy shares there. And the reasoning was some sort of policy in the US where they will not allow Chinese products within some sort of green scheme, which meant that for electric vehicles, the batteries should come from other markets. So the thinking in South Korea was, this is an opportunity for us. And there was a lot of investment in this company. Now, Goldman Sachs said this doesn't reflect the company's fundamentals. But I think most recently, if you look at that company, they have indeed done well compared to when this first started. So the retail investors who put their money in, I guess, didn't lose this, they won. But that was the initial GameStop type thing that you might pick up from South Korea. But later, even before Disney, we've seen a few instances of retail investors being engaged in governance issues, not just in terms of buying and pushing stock prices up. I'm trying to look for June because I referred to one of June's papers where he mentions the company SM Entertainment, which is a K-pop management company. So the retail investors in this company actually helped bring in governance changes in that company. There were related party transactions. But what's interesting from a Finfluencer perspective is this isn't a random person that became famous on social media like Keith Gill or Mr. Battery. This is an activist fund called Align Partners, and the founder of that fund is also one of a member of the younger generation, which is what we saw in the retail investor base. So he had a YouTube debate with somebody. I couldn't actually get a translation of this debate, but he had a debate after which he got all the retail investors on his side. So it again shows that they're voting on specific governance issues. And then there were two other companies, Samsung CNT Management and Kumho Petrochemical. Both companies, there were activist investors who were trying to bring push management to increase immediate profits, so give us more dividends, that sort of thing. And retail investors didn't actually side with the activists, they sided with management. And news articles I've referred to quote an anonymous source which said that retail investors probably didn't want immediate returns so much. They're thinking more from a long-term perspective. Which I think is quite interesting because we've been speaking over the last few days about shareholder primacy, where we're focused on short-term shareholder returns. If you have retail investors coming in and thinking in the longer term, that's already sort of one way in which we might be achieving some sort of sustainability gains in the future. I'll move now to India, where we don't see this level of developments like in South Korea or the US, but an interesting thing that happened there was that there was this big company, Adani, which against which short seller Hindenburg Research released a report saying there's a lot of fraud in this company, etc. So we are shorting their stock. And unlike in the US and in South Korea, where we saw a lot of unhappiness towards establishment short sellers, the Finfluencers in India got in on this and started to support the short sellers report. And then some analysis emerged that there's a lot of politics behind this because these companies controlling shareholder, the Adani group, was close to the current ruling party. And so there's Finfluencers who are politically aligned to the other side were supporting the short sellers report. So there was an element of this which I said I'll come back to when I spoke about the US. So this is something to always be a little wary about with the whole popular sort of engagement with companies and Finfluencers acting as nodes of coordination for retail investors. But the positives, which I think also India brings out quite well, because the Finfluencers in India have mushroomed in interior rural parts where not everyone speaks English. So the Finfluencer videos many times are in regional languages. And they're starting out with very basic things like how to invest, why should I invest, as against in South Korea where people already, the retail investors already seem to know what they're doing. So I guess in India, we see a lot more financial inclusion, financial education coming in for now, and it's going to mature over the years. In South Korea, we see a more mature retail investor market. In the US, we see a little bit of the market, maybe at least half of the retail investor market motivated by less serious issues. So that's why the whole meme stock terminology used in that context. With these developments outlined, I'll turn now to what we should or should not do in terms of law and regulation. So I've looked at what's happened in various countries, what regulators are trying to do. Countries like Australia and the UK, I think, have taken the path of this is financial advice. So you need to register yourself as a financial advisor, even if you're on social media saying, giving out investing tips, or usually these finfluencers are not really giving financial advice in the way a traditional financial advisor would give. But I think in these countries, this is the view that's been taken. And also they look at how some influencers might be tied up with companies, and this tie-up should be disclosed. And this is similar to what we saw in the influencer space. If you're promoting products of a company, you should disclose if you're getting some sort of monetary compensation from that company. But I think the regulations here are a little difficult to say that, okay, it's great, it covers everything, because so far I've only spoken about the normal finfluencers. I haven't spoken about celebrity finfluencers, or what a scholar in the US, Sue Guan, calls identity finfluencers. She calls them identity finfluencers because people like Elon Musk, based on their identity in the business world, when they make a statement on social media, there's retail investors who will sell or buy shares based on those social media statements of these individuals. So they are finfluencers even if they're not going out to give advice or to gather retail investor followers, etc. And then there's celebrity finfluencers who, if, say, Kim Kardashian was employed by a company to promote their products or shares, financial products or shares, that would be a celebrity finfluencer. But most recently in Disney, we saw the management of Disney call George Lucas, from the Star Wars, creator of Star Wars, to come out in support of the current management of Disney. And that brought a lot of retail investor attention. I've seen threads on Reddit where they're talking about this. I don't know how much that went into retail investors voting for management, but you have these celebrity influencers being used. So I'm not sure that these regulations actually catch everything, or whether some of these regulations might actually be chilling finfluencer activity, that the good stuff, right? It can actually bring financial inclusion, democratize capital markets. Like I said earlier, maybe bringing in a more long-term focus if that's what retail investors care about more. So there's this kind of different parts to it. I don't have a solution to, but what I think I try to offer in the paper is, if I call back to what Dan was saying in the opening remarks to this conference, that the time where Asian markets are taking laws from Western markets is over. I think in this paper, I'm almost saying that the reverse could be true, because we might be looking at developments in Asia and seeing what we might learn from there. So in India, they've tried to come up with a ban, but it's not really a ban. They've tried to ban finfluencer activity, but they say you need to be registered, etc., as per current laws. But current laws actually have an exception in place for social media activity. So this needs to be resolved. And there's some enforcement activity which was settled, so we don't quite have a decision yet. In South Korea, they haven't actually moved to regulate, but what we see, I think, is quite interesting in a way forward for different countries, because we see the regulator engaging with the retail investor community. So there's a retail investor association. The representative of this association regularly talks to regulators, but also the founder of Aligned Partners, whom I have classified in my paper as a finfluencer as well, even though he is leading an activist investor firm, but the way in which he's engaging and engaging retail investors, I think makes him a finfluencer. So these sort of people who are having an influence are being consulted at the moment, and I think retail investors have gathered enough political heft in South Korea to try and negotiate a ban on short selling, which I think expires sometime this year. And the regulator is consulting with these representatives to see what can be done, but they're very much looking to how can we use retail investor engagement in the market positively, and speaking to Finfluencers in this way. In the US, they haven't quite got into giving specific details of what current laws apply to Finfluencers, but I think there's some statements put out by SEC saying current laws are enough. And I think people have said that regulators might now need to monitor social media to see what's happening, because you could have bubbles and you might need to protect retail investors. But I think as we've already seen the market, retail investor market maturing, at least we've seen in South Korea, maybe a little in the US after Disney, I think people are starting to be discerning. And those who choose to take their information just from one Reddit thread, I think will be at a disadvantage. But at the moment, if you look a little wider, and management also has started to engage with retail investors. So I think there's less need for regulation if company management gets involved and engages their retail investors better. Now, I'm going to tie all this into my bigger project now as I finish in the last few minutes. In the last minute. So the bigger project is called #Capitalism. So this is talking about how you have various sources of engagement. So I've just spoken about retail investors and Finfluencers, but you can also have random people joining in these hashtags that retail investors create about a company, and the company can't tell whether you're a retail investor or an employee or unrelated to the company when there's this sort of social media activity against the company. And I've seen in some cases like an airline changing their policy about a damaged baggage when a customer tweeted this publicly, but the customer also paid to promote the tweet and get more people involved. But what we're seeing is ways in which people can overcome the costs of enforcing their rights by using social media. And I think retail investors and Finfluencers are actually part of that story and should be viewed as such. I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Akshaya. Now let's welcome Vivien.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. I always enjoy Akshaya's innovative research, which brings fresh perspectives to corporate law. Akshaya investigates the latest developments in technology and social media and examines how digital disruption creates new avenues for interaction between everyday people and corporate boards, spurring what some might describe as the democratization of corporate governance. In her paper, Akshaya examines the growing phenomenon of social media influencers whose ideas and tips about how to invest have encroached on the space of financial advice. This is regulated in some countries, in quite a lot of countries really, but what Finfluencers don't fit neatly into the traditional notions of what financial advice usually look like or how we have come to expect them to appear. Could I have the slide, please? Oh, sorry, next one. Oh, sorry, thanks, sorry. So take, for example, Kim Kardashian's post on Instagram, inviting more than 300 million followers to invest in cryptocurrency token Ethereum Max. So she says, this is not financial advice. She puts a disclaimer there. And she says, I'm just sharing what my friends have told me. So Kardashian was one of many celebrities who were part of a crypto craze, and that included an intense interest in advertising and funding cryptocurrencies and their related technologies. Akshaya's paper provides a fascinating account of the rise of Finfluencers, adding a novel perspective by focusing on two Asian jurisdictions, South Korea and India. She considers the need for regulatory interventions, and particularly around financial advice. But when financial advice is given in this context, it often is sandwiched between a lot of other content that isn't financial advice. So social posts about what Kim Kardashian does in her everyday life or something. Conversations beyond just investments. And also they have a role in financial education in some instances in diverse community languages. So they share their failures and successes, and they are relatable. So I decided to check out some Finfluencers in Malaysia, some of the leading ones, Better Leaf and Financial Fires on TikTok. So Better Leaf engages their audience in Mandarin using cute animations and sharing tips about ups and downs of trying to achieve financial security. Financial Fires speaks in Malay in line with Islamic principles, which are quite important to that community. So they get down to the level of the ordinary Malaysian trying to live well on a budget, and they speak your language. They share your day-to-day struggles and aspirations. So I noted a couple of things which I wondered if it could potentially pose some sort of difficulties for regulators in trying to enforce the rules of financial advice in this space. And one of them is that a large amount of content isn't within the space of what is considered financial advice or the statutory definitions of financial advice, which would mainly be around financial products. So if they were talking about crypto, about investing in crypto, about buying insurance, for example, that would be a financial product, that would be financial advice. So then the regulators could step in. But a lot of the other things, like how to use your money well for the Raya season and budget, and just live well on a budget, these sorts of things would not fall within the space that the regulators could step in. So they'd have to then weed through a lot of material that isn't relevant to them. So it might be tricky because Finfluencers will actually move quite easily between these spaces that are regulated and are not, and some others that are probably quite grey. So the other picture, I'm sorry it's a bit gross so early in the morning. Well, that was taken, that is GameStop's chair, and it was taken as a hint that he was going to split the stocks, which would have financial implications, would be price-sensitive information. Or some people thought it was. But it's not very clear, is it? So you couldn't say it was unequivocal, somewhat ambiguous, perhaps, or maybe just speculation on the part of the followers. So then again, these sorts of things don't happen in the normal financial advice space, but they do happen on social media. So that is another thing that regulators will have to contend with, these sorts of hints. But even though financial influencers would actually do a lot that's social and they might seem like your friend, that actually has been highlighted by regulators as a risk because, for example, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission warns in their regulatory guide that where advice is given or advertisements are placed in a social media space, there's actually a high risk environment for investors because when we're on social media, we're looking at posts from friends and family, we're looking at some funny movies that, whatever, music or something on Spotify. And that's when our guard is down. And people then can be, might actually take on advice that they might, less scrutiny than they would have, say, with a formal situation of financial advice. And friendship is another one. So influencers often come across as being altruistic. I'm your friend, I'm here to share my strategies, and I'm a really nice person, so you should follow me. Samuel Becher, in his article, queries the ethics of marketing based on the appearance of friendship, so a friend in need. And he says that relationship as part of a business model, again, can be risky for the recipient, for the investor, because they're caught, again, quite unaware. And then when advice is masked under the appearance of altruism, people might just take it without as much scrutiny as they would in a professional relationship, or one that appears to be more professional. And in a project that I've worked on with colleagues at Melbourne Law School on harmful financial products, one of the things we looked at was payday lending, which is a high-cost form of risky credit. And we found that people sometimes will take payday loans for 10 years or more, over and over, because they said these people are like my friends. They're always there when you need them, even though they charge a lot of interest. But they don't think about that. They think that these people are friends that don't judge you and they know all about your family. So this friendship then can pose a risk, or the appearance of friendship can pose a risk to investors or consumers, which suggests that perhaps that there is a need for regulation in this space, perhaps as much or well, as much as in a formal setting. The other, one of the things that sort of popped up when I was looking at the different ways in which influencers encourage collective action was that some of it's non-financial, as Akshaya mentioned, and they might sometimes respond to social inequalities or political debates that intersect with corporate governance. But because they're non-financial, then they would fall outside of this financial advice regulation. And perhaps the diversity of ways in which these interactions occur add some complexity to how to regulate finfluencing, because there's so many interactions that cover different areas of law. For example, Kim Kardashian, she was given a fine of 1.26 US dollars, 1.26 million US dollars, because she did not disclose how much she was paid for the promotion. So it wasn't that financial advice that she was caught under, but not disclosing her payments. The Hindenburg report about Adani, criticizing them, raised questions of short selling and market manipulation, which would come under securities regulation. Then Elon Musk dropping hints on social media, other sorts of hints on social media like that, making me think of the insider trading questions that I write for my students' exams. And I wondered if it might be a bit far-fetched, if it might be that breach the no tipping rule about insider trading. But then such ambiguous actions are open to interpretation. So this might then raise opportunities for research on other corporate law-related matters that relate to aspects of corporate governance, but perhaps not financial advice in some other areas, like GameStop. I think that people who engaged on the GameStop issue were mainly motivated by going against the establishment rather than any financial gain, and actually risked losing a lot of money. Whereas in the Disney one, it was more about collective shareholder action. So that was shareholders and the board, while some of the others would raise issues of stakeholders and the board, which then are sort of corporate governance, but from another angle. So Akshaya's pioneering work in this space has given us a glimpse of how digital disruption is changing the way that corporations and their bodies interact with a new generation of digital natives. And I look forward to reading more of your paper and your work in the coming months. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for Vivien's comment. Akshaya, do you have anything to say right now in response to the comment?
Mostly, I just wanted to say thank you, because I think you've brought in a number of perspectives to add, if not to this paper, but to the bigger project I was talking about. Thank you.
Okay, floor is open.
Is this on? Yeah. Hi, thanks Akshaya and Vivien, great commentary and a really interesting project. I was wondering your thoughts, because you mentioned regulation towards the end of your presentation. How do you protect the world against Kim Kardashian? So potentially, if you're in America and a regulator, you can protect Americans against Kim Kardashian. But how do you do that if you're in Australia or South Korea or India? Or, yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Wei?
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting area, and I suppose it's also a very important topic. But excuse me, maybe I'm a little bit out of the context. I was wondering, why do we need to regulate this thing? I mean, built on what we already have, the Kim Kardashian case, to start with, we have the investment advisory sort of regulations already. The Kim Kardashian case, it seems to me it's very much a investment advisory situation. No matter what she says, disclaim, I think it doesn't matter. I mean, the reason why, if I'm not wrong, I think it's a settlement with the SEC. It's not just, I mean, in a settlement, basically, SEC will be vague whether you violate the rules or not. But I think the uniqueness of this case is she's promoting something arguably may or may not be securities, right? So I mean, this is, but I mean, overall, we have this, investment advisor rule to deal with this situation. Second, if there's sort of misleading or inaccurate statements, then it's subject to the anti-fraud rules. I'm not sure, maybe in US at least, the anti-fraud rules can catch anyone who tells a lie. Maybe not that the case in other jurisdictions. And then we have, inside trading rules. And very importantly, we have anti-manipulation rules, right? I mean, oftentimes maybe you say something on social media because you want to make money out of it. But beyond that, we have another type of, pure influencer. So I just air my opinions publicly without charging, without taking, get any sort of, benefit out of it, except then that's, I think, something protected by the freedom of speech, right? So I don't know, outside these different sort of realms, is there any additional thing that we need to take care of? Actually, in addition to that, I think Vivien mentioned, so maybe the retail investors, they are sort of manipulated, their mind manipulated, or to believe in certain things and doing some very risky investment. But investment itself is risky, right? And we also have the sort of protection at the broker dealer level. That is the suitability check, right? So I think these things are already built in our current capital markets, regulations. So I was just wondering what else we need to do for this. So is there anything new added to us by this sort of, influencer, in social media, whatever? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Professor Kyung-Hoon Chung and Jennifer, second. So after we have 4 questions, and we will let them to respond first.
Okay, thank you for your very insightful presentation. Because you analyzed the Korean market and Korean influencers, and June is not here, so I feel it's my duty to provide some comments. So, in order to address the issues of the influence academically from the perspective of legal studies, I think we need to identify the key elements of influencer and try to define the concept. Probably the influencer means the person who has an influence on the financial decision making of other people through recommendations on social media. So the element would be the influence and the social media activities. The Korean guys you mentioned as influencers, I'm afraid that they are quite different in their functions. So I doubt whether they can be categorized as a single group under the name of influencer. The Mr. Battery you said, he fits relatively well to this typical example. But the Chang Won-Lee, the Align Partners founder, he's not a social media guy, as I know. He's my Facebook friend, and his posting gets likes less than 100, even less likes than my postings. And on Instagram, I just checked, and on Instagram, Chang Won-Lee has only 560 followers. So that's well below the average of the followers. So he's not a SNS guy. He belongs to legacy media. I mean, he's a graduate of the Seoul National University who studied economics, and he's a former employee of KKR and Goldman Sachs. And he's interviewed by the legacy media of Korea, the largest newspapers, for example. So I think the mechanism of his activity is a little bit different from the typical concept of influencer. Of course, he used YouTube quite a lot, but it's like as he uses the legacy media. And one more comment on the general background about the short selling regulations. Actually, in Korea, the number of retail investors is quite large. It's about 25% of total population of retail investors in the capital market, and that constitutes almost 40% of the total voters. That means the retail investors are very important in general elections and presidential elections. So the government feels the need to kind of look good to these retail investors. So there's many debate on the short selling, but many experts criticize that the regulations on short selling is a rather populist policy. So there's that kind of aspect as well.
Jennifer?
Yes, thank you both for a fascinating discussion. I just wanted to throw proxy advisors into the mix because I thought one of the particularly interesting aspects of the recent Disney matter, which got everyone in a frenzy of excitement, and then it was our management got their way again. But I thought it was really interesting that the proxy advisors were split on the advice that they gave to shareholders. And so ISS went with the activist and Glass Lewis went with management. And I don't remember seeing that so much in the past. I always think of the proxy advisors as generally being in lockstep. So I thought that was quite interesting that they split, and I just wondered your views on that.
Thanks, everyone. Great questions. I might start with Steve. I think there's a proposal I picked up on and mentioned in my paper, but not in my talk, about not that I fully agree with it, but I think it might answers your question a little. So about how some countries are requiring Finfluencers to be registered as financial advisors, and there's suggestions out there saying, oh, why don't securities regulators across markets recognize this registration in another market? So that way, if you have some sort of recognition across markets and you display it on your social media, then the retail investors who are looking will say, oh, this person is actually registered. And so rather than protecting people from unregistered Finfluencers, I feel the better way is to show which ones are registered, which ones have the... No, no, the suggestion that I was talking about is that other regulators already recognize, yeah, but I don't see this as a practical thing happening very soon because different jurisdictions have not actually come up with the same sort of rule, right? But your points, I think we are in agreement. I'm not saying that we need to regulate at all, but I can add what I say in my paper is probably when you have even a little bit of regulatory action, like in India, I said it's a ban, that's not a ban. But even that much of action already brings sort of investor education. So you're telling retail investors that, hey, there are actually some risks here. So I think really what you need to be doing from a regulatory perspective is educating retail investors that there are these new developments, these are the positives, these are the negatives. So, and mostly we have existing laws, so I agree. Your comments, thank you so much. I think there is you can take the view that the sort of aligned partners founder would be what I called an identity finfluencer, but I actually tried to create a new category for him because I thought he doesn't fit neatly in the Elon Musk category where he's just tweeting randomly and people are following that, because he's making efforts to engage the retail investor crowd. But maybe there is a way to say he's not a finfluencer, but a new age institutional investor that's engaging the retail investor crowd, just like Disney is now, from a management side, engaging the retail investor crowd. But everything else, thank you. The short selling proposals coming because they now have political heft as a sizable amount of population wanting something makes the whole retail investor dynamic coming into politics and how that interacts with corporate governance very interesting. And I think it's something other countries should watch out for as well, because retail investors are growing even across countries. For Jennifer, I agree that it was interesting, but I think I'll pick up on, again, a issue of populism with Disney. So one of the reasons, or one of the points Peltz, the activist investor, made against Disney was Disney has become too woke in its movies, etc. So it wasn't entirely on fundamentals, although it was talking about profits as well. But over time, Disney tried to do a lot of things that address the criticisms. So that's why you had a split, I think, in the advice. And in a way, I think the activist investors got what they wanted if all they wanted was to see improvements in Disney. So not so much related to retail investors, I guess, in my answer, but that's an interesting point. Thank you.
Okay, we still have a couple of minutes. Okay, Professor Matsunaka.
Thank you. I just want to add something on fundamental comments by Professor Wei. Because if we want to regulate this kind of influencers, the regulation on investment advisors might be not suitable because as far as I know, regulation on investment advisors do not consider the factor of influence. Rather, it assumes that advisors have some influence on the investors. But if we neglect the influence factor, the regulation would be too much because if I pass something that, hey, this Bitcoin is very great, I will be regulated as an advisor, although I don't have any influence on my followers. So, and in addition, market fraud regulation and market manipulate regulation do consider influence in some part, but it's ex post regulation, and I don't think this will save all the issues regarding this. So, your presentation seems to cast focus on influences that we have to make notice. So it was great to hear that. Thank you.
Arigato, Matsunaka Sensei. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm very insightful presentation. My comment is about the incentives of the influencers that gives the financial comments. This is a part of attention economy, and they are paid according to how many audiences are coming, and instead of according to the investing asset size. So that means that their incentives are like just how much they can gather the attention. So that means that there are more risks for the distorted information. So we have to concentrate about the correctness of the information. So we need to regulate them like from the different standpoint of view than the mere advisors of financial markets. So that's my view. But I don't know how to do it, but that was a very interesting representation. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Matsui. Now it's, yeah,
Thank you. So, sorry. Thank you for both your comments. I think with the first comment about not needing to regulate directly, I guess contrary to what you were saying, but I agree with the points you were raising, even though I'm not calling for regulations at this point. I think that definitely accountability issues when your incentives are about how many followers you can get. So there's one Finfluencer in India who said he has pioneered Finfluencer comedy. So, you know, to sound funny, you might have more content which may or may not be entirely accurate. At the same time, I guess with the example of politics and where Finfluencers are ideologically oriented in a certain way, again, it's less on fundamentals of finance, more on their views. So it's hard to, again, as we heard about freedom of expression, right? It's hard to say don't express pro-Trump views or anti-Modi views or something like this, right? If you're dragging that into the finance space, then I think we just need regulators to try and educate retail investors more. If there's jurisdictions believe in putting more money into the regulator, then I guess the regulator can monitor social media to an extent when they see bubbles forming. I mentioned this because in Australia, not in the Finfluencer context, but in the influencer context, the consumer watchdog does monitor social media a little. But I don't think it's efficient in every country to do this. But it's a good point. Thank you. And thank you to you as well.
okay. We still have 3 minutes, so we can have 1 to 2 questions. Okay, if not, I think, we have a very excellent presentation, wonderful comments, and we have many good questions from the floor. So I believe if your body battery was not fully charged last night, now we begin to recharge again from the first session. Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand over to Dan.